In Inside Out, Riley's drama unfolds as she tries to deal with changes in her life, guided by her emotions, joy, sadness, anger, fear, and disgust. However, what if the real issue wasn't the behavior of her emotions but the choices Riley makes along the way? According to this theory, Riley is the villain of her own story, as it's her resistance to her feelings and impulsive actions that generate the biggest conflicts in her life. Her emotions are actually neutral and even try to help her cope with her challenges. Therefore, Riley, and not her emotions, is the source of the main conflicts. To understand Riley as the villain, it's important to view her emotions as passive agents. Joy, sadness, anger, fear, and disgust exist to help her react to the external world, functioning as advisors rather than manipulators. Each emotion tries, in its own way, to support Riley, even if their intentions sometimes clash. They merely reflect what might be most beneficial for her at a given moment, helping her process experiences and adapt. The problem, however, arises when Riley rejects these messages and tries to ignore or force certain emotions to disappear, instead of listening to what each one has to say. For example, she tries to banish sadness and neglect fear, believing that only joy should guide her life. In this way, Riley begins to fight against her own mind, seeking absolute control over her feelings. By rejecting her emotions, Riley turns against herself, acting harmfully and creating her own conflicts. Riley's peak as a villain occurs when she decides to run away from home. Feeling misunderstood and frustrated with her new life, instead of seeking help or trying to communicate with her parents, Riley adopts an extreme and impulsive solution, fleeing to Minnesota. This decision is not influenced by her emotions. It is a conscious and deliberate choice by Riley, driven by her refusal to face what she is feeling. She doesn't seek to resolve her problems constructively. On the contrary, she decides to abandon everything and everyone, leaving her parents without any warning. When she steals the credit card to buy the ticket, Riley shows that she is taking conscious and destructive actions. She acts without thinking of the consequences, which makes her responsible for putting herself and her parents in an even more painful situation. Here, Riley is not a victim of her emotions but of her own decisions, rejecting any possibility of understanding or reconciliation with her current situation. A key element of Riley's villainy is how she tries to control and eliminate certain feelings. She believes that sadness is something to be avoided at all costs and thus tries to ignore any moment when she feels down, thinking that only joy should dominate her life. This repression prevents her from processing the grief over the life she left behind in Minnesota and dealing with the reality of her new life. Riley's continuous rejection of sadness blocks her emotional growth and distances her more and more from herself. By trying to eliminate sadness, Riley not only prevents herself from growing but also creates a cycle of self-sabotage where her feelings accumulate and explode uncontrollably. She becomes, in fact, her own antagonist, as she tries to silence the emotions that would be fundamental to her healing and adaptation process. In her struggle against what she feels, she deviates further from self-understanding and balance. When we analyze Riley's actions, it's clear that her choices make her primarily responsible for the events that unfold. Riley's emotions do not force her to act in a certain way. They are merely natural responses to her life's stimuli. It is Riley who decides to distance herself from her parents, who steals the credit card, and who embarks on an escape plan. These actions demonstrate a resistance to accepting that discomfort and sadness are also part of the human experience. Riley's responsibility in her choices reflects her attempt to escape situations she finds challenging. However, by avoiding these challenges, she creates even more problems for herself. Instead of trying to understand what sadness wants to tell her, and how she might handle the grief and changes, Riley prefers to ignore it, believing that she can find happiness by erasing parts of her psyche. By acting this way, she ceases to be the victim and becomes her own adversary. In Inside Out 2, Riley faces a new cycle of intense emotions, but this time, anxiety emerges prominently in her psyche, generating conflicts and hasty decisions. During a hockey camp, she finds herself in an emotional whirlwind when she learns that her friends will need to transfer to another school, which sparks overwhelming anguish. This restlessness grows as she contemplates the possibility of facing school life without the people she trusts. especially with the added challenge of skill tests in the sport she loves. Anxiety begins to dominate her, leading Riley to question her ability to remain balanced without her friendships, intensifying the internal pressure. Dominated by anxiety and the need for validation, Riley decides to temporarily distance herself from her friends in an attempt to seek acceptance from a new group of popular girls. However, this decision only amplifies her insecurity, as she now feels the need to constantly compare herself to others, fearing that she might not be good enough or might fail in front of them. This situation makes her even more anxious, and the concern for the group's approval causes her to engage in increasingly impulsive actions. The situation reaches its peak when Riley, in a moment of lack of control, sneaks into the coach's office to read her notes, and in another episode, pushes one of her friends forcefully, revealing how far she is willing to go to maintain this new image of herself. It's important to remember that anxiety, as an emotion, is not responsible for her actions. It doesn't make decisions, it only signals Riley's fears and insecurities. The choices to break ties with friends, to seek approval in a group where she doesn't feel authentic, to invade the coach's privacy, and even to confront a friend physically are Riley's decisions, who opts for reactive paths instead of dealing healthily with her feelings. This storyline reinforces the complexity of Riley's mind, where her emotions act as guides, but ultimately, she is the one who decides which path to take in her story, bearing all the consequences of her choices. In conclusion, Riley should not be seen as an outright villain in her story, but rather as a teenager who, still immature, makes mistakes and impulsive decisions driven by the confusion and pressure of the intense emotions she experiences. Although anxiety, fear, and sadness are present in her mind, they are not the true culprits of her actions. They are merely reflections of her insecurities and the challenges she faces. It is Riley who makes each decision, to distance herself from friends, to seek acceptance in new circles, and in moments of lack of control, to act rashly and even aggressively. Her actions, while misguided, are typical of someone learning to handle complex feelings and the consequences of their choices. Thus, Riley is, above all, a young person in search of self-understanding, and her journey shows that her failures and conflicts are part of a necessary and inevitable growth process. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed this analysis of Riley and the emotional drama of Inside Out. If you liked it, don't forget to hit that like button to support and help the channel grow. And now, check out the video appearing on the screen. I'm sure you'll love it. See you there.